I think something that we don't talk about as much is the role the regulators play here, right? And I think cash has been taken out of the system whenever you have also had governments that really wanted to make that leap from an informal economy to a formal economy. And that means some banned words like taxation, right? And I think that's a huge problem in places like in Mexico, right? And if you look at other examples in the world like India or Brazil, you had governments that said, hey, we want to bring the economy into the light, if you will.
This is Converge, a podcast from Convera. Come with us as we shape the future of finance.
Welcome back to yet another Converge episode at Money 2020, recording live here on day one. I am excited to have Zoya Lieberman and Ramiro Nandez fresh off their stage session covering the payments conundrum, one of my favorite words, in the Americas. Ramiro, Zoya, welcome to you both. Can you give us a little background introduction on yourselves, your company, your mojo? Why don't we start with you, Zoya?
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Zoya Lieberman. I've been in this space for about 20 years. I started when I was 7, obviously. And I spent a lot of my career working with financial institutions, perfecting their strategy and product and whatnot in the B2B space. And then I went to the dark side, right, and joined a fintech technology organization in trying to see how things are actually made versus how they envisioned. So that's my background.
Excellent. How about you, Ramiro?
Oh, thank you, Alex. I'm Ramiro Nandez. I lead the Mercado Pago individuals business for Mexico. I've been with the company for about 5 years, and I've been in the financial industry for about 10. Mercado Pago, as some of the people might know, is the fintech arm of Mercado Libre, the e-commerce giant in Latin America. And we're currently pursuing a sort of digital bank value prop across the region, where I'm in charge of operations in Mexico. Yeah.
Nice. Well, lots to talk about, obviously, in these two realms. So, Zoya, Endava, I understand, is partnering with OpenAI to deploy ChatGPT Enterprise to staff across your own business. I'm sure you've used it to prepare for today's podcast and many other things. How do you envision AI shaping the future of digital payments in the Americas, especially in regions where cash is still dominant?
This is a really fun question, right? When you work for a company where technology and transformation and all things tech are on top of everybody's mind, I'm an outlier, right? Because I work quite a bit with financial institutions that perhaps are not known for being in the innovation space, right? So bridging the gap in this space and creating the actual scenario and creating a business case for why it matters and why everybody should be on the same page is challenging, right? So a lot of times I find myself functioning almost as a diplomat, right? A translator of sorts, going to a variety of organizations and explaining to them why what happens in AI space actually matters and how it's going to help everybody, both from the operational standpoint as well as servicing client standpoint. And it is challenging because I think it's a much bigger problem overall than we lead ourselves to believe. So from that point, when you ask me an open-ended question, how do I feel about AI? It depends on the day, similar to how I feel about my kids and who's my favorite. It depends on the day. So some days I'm incredibly optimistic because I can see how AI can really drive and shape what we do today and how we do it. On other days, I feel like Sarah Connor of the conversation and wondering if we're trusting too much technology that we created, and we're humans and we're not perfect. And yet we think that something that we created will be perfect. So those are dilemmas that I'm struggling with every day.
Yeah. And if I could compliment,
please.
actually, Alex, at Mercado Pago, we are also collaborating with OpenAI. And I actually just went to a breakfast this morning with Colin Jarvis, their chief architect officer. And we were talking about the potential that AI has in Latin America. And if you're thinking about, financial inclusion and democratizing finances for the population as a whole, I think AI can really lower the boundaries to entry and really help us bring a lot of people into the fold. And that's something that really excites me, right? We were just talking with Colin this morning around, for example, initiatives like advising, right? Typically, financial advisory was restricted to the ultra wealthy, right? But imagine now if you're like in some remote corner in Mexico in the middle of the countryside, and through the Mercado Pago app, you could access a personal financial advisor, right? So it could really be a game changer. And I think it can really help us also, not only on the sort of product front with the customer facing side of things, but also lower the cost of serving those populations on the back end, right? So optimizing a lot of processes, customer experience, customer service, fraud prevention, etc. There is enormous potential for this technology. I do agree with Zoya that I'm a bit cautious as well in terms of, hey, like, this could go really well. This could also go really, really bad. Um, the jury, is going to be out for a few years, but it's exciting.
Yeah, it certainly is. Given that cash is so deeply entrenched in the culture of many Latin American countries, what are some of the hurdles that you face in promoting a digital payments adoption of full digital payment, adoption, and how are you addressing those hurdles to get beyond the sort of attachment to cash?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think we briefly touched on it just now when we were talking on stage with Zoya. Um, I think that the answer to your question has two parts, right? I think on the sort of more private sector technology companies, we have to do everything in our power to bring forward useful products that understand the local idiosyncrasies, and that the customers can use. Um, and I think a lot of companies have done that, right? And I was giving the example on stage. Um, in Mexico, because of the huge reliance on cash, right? It's about 70 to 75% of the economy is cash based. We had to tailor our strategy and we had to develop cash points, right? For people to deposit cash or withdraw cash from the Mercado Pago account. We don't have that in other countries. We were not focusing on developing a physical store network across the country. And in Mexico, we have to do it to adapt our product, right? So you need that on the private side. I think something that we don't talk about as much is the role the regulators play here, right? And I think cash has been taken out of the system whenever you have also had governments that really wanted to make that leap from an informal economy to a formal economy. And that means some banned words like taxation, right? And I think that's a huge problem in places like in Mexico, right? And if you look at other examples in the world like India or Brazil, you had governments that said, hey, we want to bring the economy into the light, if you will. And we want to make it a formal economy. We want to bring down corruption, etc. And that really pushed digitization, right, as a way of getting rid of corruption, getting rid of that sort of black market economy. And that hasn't been the case in some other countries. And that's why you have such a huge cash usage in some places. So I think you need both.
Yeah, yeah. Did you want to comment on that as well?
Sure, why not? I mean, that's a really interesting topic. And I also think it depends on who you're speaking to and the point of view. I would make an argument that all of us at this event probably on the forefront of using digital technology, and we are all very open to that, right? For example, last year I was in Mexico City 7 times. Not a single time I ever had a need to use cash, right? Everything that I did was through digital means, which is a completely opposite of the experience that Ramiro just described for majority of the population, right? So if I didn't know that, my perception would have been completely different. And if I was representing a company that's going into that market, I would falsely assume that everybody is on board with digital payment experience, which is absolutely not the case, right? So I think it's really important to understand that just because a percentage of population is ready to take that leap, it doesn't mean that the entire population is. And I think the big issue everywhere is the financial literacy. I think not enough, not even close, is being done to explain why certain types of payments and the way of doing business are actually beneficial.
Couldn't agree more. Ramiro, you mentioned in the past that over 60% of Mercado Pago users prefer mobile number transfers. How does this preference impact your strategy for expanding that financial inclusion? Obviously, this is a easier way for a lot of people to move money. What role does the ease of the user experience in that play in this context?
Yeah, great question. And I think this is another one of those that allows us to sort of compare and contrast between different countries, right? So I think in Brazil, one of many reasons why PIX, the instant payment platform that the government developed, was so successful was because it allowed you to use different channels, right? You could use your mobile phone number and link it to your account. You could use your email. You could use an alias. You could use a QR, right? And so it was very easy and it was very customer centric. Hey, I don't care which way you're coming to use this product. We make it available for you. We make it easy for you. That hasn't been the case in Mexico, right? So in Mexico, you have this weird thing that is called clave, which is 18 numbers long. It's longer than your debit or credit card number. Nobody knows it, right? So if we go out for dinner tonight and I tell you like, hey, can you I'll pay for it. Can you transfer me? I need to go into my home banking. I need to get my clave, screenshot it, send it to you, so you can transfer it.
Does that just stand for keys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's weird. It's clave with a Toby,
Okay.
not the other one, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a play on words. But um, basically, I mean, that is not a user centric solution. And what we have found from talking to a lot of customers is like, hey, everybody remembers their phone number. So currently, through the Mercado Pago app, we see a lot of transfers, and that's within our ecosystem. People want to transfer out to other people. The easiest way of doing that is with phone numbers, and so that has really played into our strategy. And we just joined this new initiative that the central bank and a lot of the traditional banks are putting forward, which is called DEMO, for digital money, and basically allows you to link your cell phone number to your bank account, and now you can do transfers to someone's cell phone number. It's still not the greatest. I think it still has opportunities, like in Brazil, linking your email or linking an alias, etc. But I think it's a step in the right direction. At the end of it, right? What's behind all of this is how do we create really great solutions for the customer, putting the customer in the center at first.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, Zoya, how can traditional financial institutions and fintechs that really are brainstorming these customer centric solutions collaborate to build a more robust and inclusive payments infrastructure in the Americas? Do you have any successful examples of such partnerships that you could share?
Right. So this is where I'm going to be the Debbie Downer and say that there are actually very few successful examples of
Yeah.
partnerships. And the reason why I think is, again, because everybody looks at the picture in a very narrow way, like what's in it for me, right? So I agree with Ramiro about the fact that, yes, we all have to look at it from a very customer centric standpoint. And everybody certainly talks about it, but that is not happening, right? So when you talk about the core financial institutions and how do you create partnerships, it's not just about putting customer in the middle of this conversation, but looking at the entire customer journey. And I think that's where we failed miserably as an industry. Everybody tries to take a piece of a puzzle to solve, but nobody is really looking at the entire puzzle, right?
Yeah.
And that's why we can't come together. So how do we do this, or what needs to happen? It's not necessarily about customer centricity. It's about understanding of the fact that we are trying to change human behavior, and this is the most difficult thing to do, right? So instead of trying to change the behavior, you have to change the approach. As I said earlier on stage, humans really not prone to change unless a significant event takes place. So if we're expecting everybody to embrace something new, there has to be a clear benefit to everybody. And I don't think that has been articulated by anyone in particular. We're all moving, hopefully, in the same direction, but not at the same pace.
Yeah.
So that's the issue.
Well, using Mercado Pago as an example, your relationship with traditional banks is seen as a positive sign for financial inclusion by many. Can you elaborate, Ramiro, on how these partnerships benefit both your company and the unbanked population?
Yeah, so I think the clearest example, so Mercado Pago has a B2B business and a B2C, right? So on the B2B side, we're doing acquiring, right? So we do payment processing for merchants, and we're a payment aggregator. Behind us sit traditional banks. And so I talk with traditional banks like Santander, BBVA, Citibanamex in Mexico, and they really want my acquiring business. The interesting story there is that on the flip side of that, on the issuing side for debit cards, credit cards, etc., we're competing for the same customer, right? So I think you get to that point that Zoya was making regarding, like, on the one side we collaborate, on the other side we are competing. But I think we have had a very successful collaboration on the acquiring side, and that has allowed us to roll out our POS business, where we are basically bringing payment terminals to millions of businesses in Mexico. And in the last 5 years, non-traditional institutions, so non-traditional banks, have rolled out 2x the number of POSs that were already in the market by traditional banks. That means that we brought a lot of merchants to the system that previously were just charging in cash, and now they're doing it through card payments. And we couldn't have done that if we didn't have these partnerships with traditional banks that are acquirers. And I think that's a really good example of that kind of collaboration, helping drive financial inclusion and understanding that we have different roles to play in some parts of this puzzle.
Makes sense. We talked earlier with a Colombian broker, Acciones y Valores, and they highlighted the different regulatory landscapes across the Americas. So what are the key considerations for fintech companies like Mercado Pago when you're expanding services into new markets, given that there's such fragmentation in the regulatory landscape, even within your own region?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a great dilemma, and I don't think I have a silver bullet. I would say that you do need very deep local knowledge,
Mhm.
and oftentimes a solution that works in one country does not work, or is not, you're not able to implement it in other regions. And we've had several of those. I'll give you one example. Banking accounts for underage teenagers, right? 15 to 18 years old. In Argentina, we have a product, it's hugely successful. We wanted to bring it to Brazil. We had to do a lot of tailoring. Hey, surprise, we cannot roll it out in Mexico because of the regulation. So I think, yes, when you're looking at Latin America, the regulation is complex. It varies a lot country by country. You do need that local expertise. But as I was saying earlier, I think there is also an opportunity to keep pushing the regulator not to think exclusively about their own country, and to foster collaboration, or at least dialogue across the region, so we can start developing some kind of regional framework or blueprint that allows for certain similarities and levels a little bit the playing field across the region, so that companies that are coming from outside, can easily implement solutions in more than one country.
Back to the subject of cash, if you don't mind, Zoya. How can technology bridge that gap between those who are really comfortable with cash and that's cash status quo, and then those who embrace the movement towards digital financial services? What innovations, I guess, that help bridge that gap are you excited about, or are you seeing?
Good question. I think really it depends on which slice of the population you're discussing, right? And I hate to say it, it also depends on the age group. Like for somebody like my kids is a really good example. They don't understand the meaning of cash. Cash to them is meaningless.
Mhm.
Their currency are Roblox, right? That's the value that they understand.
Mhm.
So I think it's not necessarily about removing the cash from the equation, but creating the value and understanding that cash is not the only value carrier. And there are other things that carry that similar value. And I think that's really the way to push this forward. And, we were talking about cash and what's happening in Mexico, I think partially because of what Ramiro's company is doing. I'm the example of the person who never had to use cash because all the merchants were accepting cards, right? And I didn't even carry my wallet with me. I only carried my phone. So to answer your point, again, it goes back to the human behavior and about convenience, right? Once you make something so convenient that any other method of transacting becomes too taxing, then the conversation ends right there. So I think that, frankly, is the way to move forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's really just customer experience related. Ramiro, you stated that Mercado Pago aims to be the number one digital bank in Mexico. What are the key features and services that will differentiate Mercado Pago to get you there from those traditional banks, given that it's such a competitive market? Given that you just mentioned you weren't able to expand the teenage solution into that market, how are you going to beat those headwinds?
Yeah, so I think we have some things that differentiate us tremendously from some of our competitors. I think when you look at a lot of the fintech companies that are rolling out their value proposition in Mexico, we all have somewhat of a similar approach in terms of what products we want to bring to market, access to credit, easy and simple customer solutions, etc. So that's not going to be our differentiating angle. We have to do that right. We have to do it really, really well. But that's not going to give us an edge. And I do think that what we have differently from others, first of all, one of the largest IT teams in the region. We have over 18,000 software engineers at Mercado Libre working to develop world-class solutions. Another thing that we have that I think it's very difficult to replicate, it's this very positive forward loop within our ecosystem between our fintech side and our retail e-commerce, right? Similar to what you might see here in North America with Amazon, or what you see with Chinese players in China, like AliExpress and Alipay, etc., where we have customers that are coming to our e-commerce to shop, and Mercado Libre is the number one e-commerce retailer in Mexico and in many other countries in the region. And we can tap into those clients, right? So for me to access this low income population, it's a lot easier than for other institutions that don't have that source of customers and don't have that information about their transactions, their behaviors, etc. So I think those are some of the key differentiators. Obviously, on top of delivering an excellent product for the customer on the fintech side.
Absolutely, yeah. Lastly, just looking ahead, Zoya, what are your predictions for the future of the payments landscape in the Americas? If you were to be put on your futurist hat for a minute, what trends do you both, or starting with you, Zoya, what do you see shaping the industry in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
So in my mind, and I've mentioned earlier, it's all about the convenience. And I know we overuse word seamless a lot, but really, at least in the consumer universe, that's what matters, right? So the way I envision things is that payments really are going to be seamlessly integrated into part of my daily journey, whatever decisions that I'm making, whether it's making my mortgage payment or paying my kids' tuition or booking a vacation or doing shopping, or it doesn't matter. It has to be integrated within all other decisions in my daily life. Like that's what I envision the future to be in the consumer space. I think in the business space, it's quite different because there are a lot more complex problems to solve. But the reality is, I think that's also a way to go forward in the B2B space in order to move everybody from cash and checks and archaic forms of payments to the future. There still has to be convenience and the conversation about what's in it for me and what's the financial impact. So that's what I see as maybe the next, 2, 5, 10 years, what will move the industry forward.
How about you, lastly, Ramiro?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Soya said. I do think that seamless payments are a key trend that is coming. Things like when you're thinking about Latin America in particular, um, maybe some things that are more commonplace here in the US, like NFC or tap to pay, etc. Coming to Latin America, I think could be we're gonna see a revolution on that front. And I'm hugely excited about AI. To be very honest, I think it can help us leap forward in the region. It can help us, as we were talking earlier, bring a lot of people into the system that are currently not participating or did not have access to certain products. So I think we're gonna see a lot there. And I'm also very curious. I don't know where it's gonna go, but I think blockchain technology can also be an incredible enabler for the region in terms of more infrastructure and what we can bring in terms of payments and payment technology across countries. I think blockchain technology could also have a key role to play. I'm not so sure where it's going to go or what's going to happen there, but I think it's also an exciting trend. Yeah.
Yeah, there's still a lot of uncertainty and proving in the real world for all those technologies. But I think we see the same optimistic vision of the future. That's great. Zoya, Ramiro, thank you for joining. This was a pleasure. Great job on your stage session today. Thanks for being a part of Converge, and hope to have you back in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Alex.
Take care.